CM Punk's WWE career is one of the most debated topics on the internet wrestling community. There's a certain portion of the audience that believe that CM Punk, before leaving the WWE, was on the cusp of something huge and was mistreated by upper management and a ginormous missed opportunity. There's also a portion of the audience who believe that he was overrated and his run is only looked at for a short scope of time, and that time brought in a lot of complacency and falsification into the wrestling world. To some, he's a hero who tried to change the system for the better. To others, he's a man who ruined wrestling in a way. In this video, we're going to take a look at both sides of the arguments, and with CM Punk possibly making his return to pro wrestling shortly, what better a time to dissect the two sides than now? And as always, I will leave the question up to you. Was he really that good, or was it just a narrative spun by the online wrestling community? When you look at CM Punk's WWE career, 2011 is always the first thing that comes to mind. And let's be honest, this was the point where CM Punk was at his hottest. Sure, he had won titles before, but there was always a backstage disapproval on CM Punk. They didn't believe in his ability to be a top guy. Even when he was the world champion, it didn't feel that big. He had shown what he could do on the mic and in the ring with the Straight Edge Society and Jeff Hardy feuds, but the Summer of Punk is the high point of CM Punk's WWE run. In June of 2011, CM Punk revealed that his WWE contract will be coming to an end, and this was true. He was burnt out and he wanted to leave the company, so the company turned it into a storyline. It was here where he cut the pipe bomb, a now infamous promo idolized and held in the annals of WWE microphone gold. Here he said things like the company would be better after Vince died, he called out The Rock, he referenced other companies, you guys know the drill. This was what many people attribute as a time where they returned to the product because it had gotten so boring, so PG that they couldn't bear watching it. For many fans, CM Punk was the closest thing to Stone Cold. He was the one who brought the edge back to wrestling. They were sick of Cena being a goofball, and this was the man that they were forever latched onto. With it, the Summer of Punk was the hottest angle that the company had ran in years, so Punk's ability to mesh realism and fiction created an online buzz in the wrestling community. This was the man that everyone said was going to skyrocket WWE's popularity back to the level of the late 90s. The whole story was very compelling, and once Punk won the WWE Championship, everything became very convoluted and messy, and the man who everyone says was bringing so many eyes back to the WWE and all these lapsed fans back to the product was overshadowed, and for a lack of a better term, he was buried. Sure, he went on a 434-day reign as WWE Champion afterwards, and it still felt huge, but a portion of the wrestling fan base believed that WWE right here fumbled the bag big time. The first side of this argument on CM Punk was that he was a huge missed opportunity. Wrestling fans believe that because John Cena was so far exceeding every aspect in WWE, that WWE was blind to what they had in CM Punk. They failed to capitalize on the momentum of their next mainstream star. And people do believe that CM Punk, if pushed further, could have been a mainstream star. There was even talks of Cena turning heel and Punk becoming the Stone Cold babyface, but that never materialized. He was outselling Cena in merch for a period of time, he was the one delivering compelling stories, but he was cast aside, and that is what bugs people so much, was they had a guy who had the wrestling acumen, promo skills, and overall marketability that WWE was completely blindsided to. There's been a lot of talk about Punk being notoriously hard to work with backstage and a perception that he couldn't be a top guy because of his size. So during the years of 2011 to 2013, where CM Punk was doing his best work, he wasn't really presented as the guy. He was always shadowed by the actual guy, and that was John Cena. The outrage got even worse when Punk's year of hard work was tossed aside to do Rock Cena 2, and Punk got robbed of his main event. The robbery of the WrestleMania main event is a completely valid point. He had been delivering amazing matches, and him being in that match would have given him his main event shine and helped push CM Punk's stock forward. Him not getting his main events always sat on the back of Punk's mind, and a year later, he would no longer be with the company. And fans still cling on to this notion that you had everything there with CM Punk, and they completely missed it by not putting any stock behind him. Whether that's Vince or Triple H or whoever, that argument can definitely be made that they messed up. The connection Punk made with wrestling fans in this time period was special. There's people who started watching him and simply just gravitated towards him because he was just a simple dude who took no BS, he made everything feel real, and he was relatable. A lot like Stone Cold Steve Austin. Some will even say that CM Punk cultivated a culture to the point where you can link him to the creation of a promotion like AEW. WWE wasn't the end all be all, and he's the reason that everyone's eyes opened to just how full of garbage WWE was, the backstage politics, and everything concerning what happened during the CM Punk saga. One of the main points made here is that fans say that CM Punk drove back WWE fans in massive droves and piles, and he was reconnecting those who lost their love of the business. But there's an opposite side to Punk being the man to carry WWE forward. The other side of this argument is that the summer of Punk was complete BS. That people spun the narrative in their favor just because it was the closest thing to the Attitude Era they could get, and they wanted to cling on to that so very badly. That no, this wasn't a time where disenfranchised fans returned to the product, but wrestling became filled with complainers and internet wrestling fans spewing their own spin on what you need to believe a pro wrestler should be. One of the things that's talked about a lot is that CM Punk brought in all these fans who had turned the product off. I did some quick number crunching, and there really is a huge difference. The time period is different though, but they really didn't return in the droves that everyone says. Just looking at these numbers, you can tell that it remained relatively the same. Before the Summer of Punk storyline began, the average rating for Raw in 2011 was 3.39. The weeks where the Summer of Punk was at its height, the average Raw rating was 2.76. And sure, it's a shorter scope of time, but the narrative has always been for the longest time that all these millions and millions of people came back to watch Raw and see what Punk would do. So there is a valid point that all these fans didn't just come back. Hell, people even turned off the product. And sure, some people did return, but looking at the analytics, they do speak the truth. I think one thing that also contributes to this is the narrative that CM Punk's storyline was the hottest thing in years. And because it was the hottest thing in years, it made everything feel so much bigger. And during that time, people just decided like, hey, let's just attribute everything to CM Punk. He wasn't here before, and now that he's here all of a sudden, maybe he's the one creating all this buzz. Fans wanted something edgy and something to hang on to so bad that you could say they overhyped CM Punk into more than what he actually was because they were tired of the product. So when they found a guy who made wrestling and reality bleed together, they clung onto him and defended his every action. And these same people are the ones who ruined wrestling in a way by rejecting up-and-coming stars, wanting it their way, hijacking shows, and creating this toxicness, if that's even a word, that we see in the wrestling community today. People will also say this about CM Punk, and trust me, I have seen this a lot, that he's a hypocrite who speaks all these gospel truths and then proceeds to go back on his word. While doing some research for this video, I came across a comment, and that comment read, "Wrestling fans act like CM Punk is the second coming of Jesus Christ." I'll let you make of that what you want, but I think the argument is there for him being a missed opportunity, but there's also a huge case that just as much, he was a little bit overrated by the wrestling community. Sure, WWE had a buzz online, Punk outsold Cena in merch, but what else? So based on these two sides I provided you, what do you think? I tried to give you guys as close to these two arguments as I could. There's a genuine appeal of CM Punk as a character, and I get it, he was edgy, he made the summer of 2011 must-see TV, it felt real, dare I say it felt like the attitude was back in WWE at a time where the product was a complete PG piss pool. But there's also an argument that he ruined wrestling in a way, and that, yeah, he is overrated. What do you guys think? Was CM Punk the superstar that should have carried WWE forward? Did WWE screw up? Did WWE miss an opportunity? Or was the narrative of CM Punk being Stone Cold 2.0 just something that the internet still wants you to believe? As always, I don't answer these questions, you guys do. Let me know in the comments, what do you think of the overall scope of CM Punk's WWE career?